Welcome back, team. Another scorching day here in Taupo. Today I'm going to tackle a job I've been meaning to do for a few months. That is install one of these Navara cigarette lighter USB combo sort of plug socket things. We're going to install these connected to the leisure battery so that when we're out and about we've got lots of solar. I can charge camera batteries, you know, phones, tablets, that sort of thing. I also wanted a combo one for cigarette lighter so that I can charge my drone batteries off this, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we're looking at the gauge of wire we're going to use to hook this up. Obviously we need to take into account what that charger is going to draw. So I've got one of these little external units. Now the reason it's external is I want to install it up underneath the top cupboards here. I thought of installing it flush mount, but these would actually protrude up into the cabinet with the spade connectors on top and the wires, and I don't want them bumped. I don't want to have to try and box that off in these cabinets up here. I don't want to, you know, throw some gear in there and bend these pins, have them touch together, have them arc, that sort of thing. So I got one of these external units. Doesn't look as nice, I know, but it'll be tucked up out of the way, and I think it'll be quite useful. Okay, so here is my fuse panel in Rosy. So first things first, I shut off the 12 volt battery isolator, and then I actually removed the fuse here from for the DC outlets, and now I've switched it back on just so that I can use the battery for other things. But I've got a couple of other DC outlets, and so I'm going to be wiring this one into the same circuit that they come from. So I've just removed the fuse, and I'll test one of the other DC outlets, make sure there's no power, and then get to installing these ones. Alright, so my two cables are in. Black one is negative and white is the positive. I've run them in this bit of a sheath here, and they go up through the bottom of the cupboard and then all the way back to that fuse box you saw earlier. Okay, let's stop for a sec, and we're going to talk about the gauge of wire. So this is the wire I'm using. The gauge is basically the thickness of the wire. So this is 4mm thick wire, but the actual core is 1.85 millimeters squared. So different companies will label their wire differently, their cables. So always look for that millimeter squared value. So what I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description to a calculator online, SolarWinds calculator, where you can calculate the gauge of wire you require. It's based on three things. First, the amps that we're going to draw through this cable, how much power, how much current are we going to draw through. Secondly, the distance from, or the length of the cable run, so the distance of the outlets to the battery. And third, the acceptable loss. So what percentage of loss of power is acceptable to us? Typically, in the calculator will show you that's 2 or 3%. So you key all those in, and it'll pump out and tell you what gauge wire you need. I tend to go a little bit thicker, even though it's a bit trickier to work with because it's thicker and it's a little bit more expensive. I tend to go a little bit thicker just to be on the safe side. Now, an example of really thin wire is a sort of speaker cable power wire here. This would be really good for maybe running a single LED light that's going to draw, you know, half an amp or an amp, but it's not good, and it's going to get too hot if we were to use it in an application like this. So basically, to calculate what we're going to draw, this is my Phantom battery charger, my drone battery charger. This will draw 4 amps when it's charging a battery. So we'll start there, we've got 4 amps. Secondly, these USB ports. So say I had a drone battery charging and also wanted to charge my iPad and say a phone. So this has a 2 plugs, one is 1 amp and one is 2.1 amp. So say we were charging a phone and a tablet, we'd be drawing 3.1 amp. If we were charging a battery at the same time, we're drawing another 4 amp, so all up 7.1 amps of draw. So the cable I've gone for is 1.85 millimeters squared, and that's rated between 10 and 15 amps, so a little bit above that the requirement. So if I was charging a whole lot of stuff, camera batteries, phone, you know, drone battery, be drawing between 7 and 10 amps, but I probably won't be charging that much at once, but I want to be on the safe side. So if I do forget and I plug a whole bunch of stuff in, I don't want wires to fizzle. So yeah, really important to check that out. As I said, check the link out below. And yeah, always use the correct gauge of wire. It may be more expensive in the short term, but it's going to save you a lot of hassle in the long run. Okay, so where we're at, we have our two USB sockets, we have our cigarette lighter socket. What we're going to do is create, we're going to have two spade connectors from each one. So here's a couple that I've had from another electrical project I was working on, so positive and a negative that'll plug into the back of that one. We're going to then make the same with a couple more spades for this one, and we are going to join those two together and solder it up to the cable that I've got hanging through the roof. So let's get to soldering a couple more spade connectors. Alright, well here's my two new cables I've made. I decided to make two in the end. I was going to reuse these two little guys here that I had from another electrical job, and they were a bit short, the wires to work with, so I just thought I might as well make new ones, keep them all the same. I know you can put heat shrink around the end, but I've just put a bit of tape around the end instead of heat shrink, just because I'm a tad lazy, and heat shrink's probably a bit overkill. They're already crimped, so they're not going to pull out, but just a bit of tape to be sure. So I'm going to go ahead and solder the two negatives together, the two positives together, and then wire them up to everything else. Alrighty, so here are my two pigtails, one for the positive, one for the negative. I know the soldering in the middle of these wasn't too tidy, but should do the trick. I put some heat shrink over the top and also taped both ends of the heat shrink. So now I'm going to join this to the negative wire that's poking out of the hole I drilled in the cupboards, this to the positive one, and then we'll hook it all up. Well, here's the finished product. So we got our unit up and mounted in there. I'm quite happy with how it looked in the end. Got our two these little dust covers over the top. They're like a rubber dust cover that you screw in when you screw it in. They're an optional thing, but I thought I'd keep them on so it looks a bit tidy. Got our two USB plugs here under that cover, and then under this one we've got our cigarette socket there. So last thing to do is to pop the fuse back in and see if they work. Cool, well, fuse is all in and nothing popped. Can't smell anything burning yet, so that's a bonus. Got a little blue light on here which indicates that it's on, so that's probably one good reason to put these little dust covers on, these rubber dust covers, is to hide that blue light. I tested it out with my little 5-volt USB fan. These things you get from the Warehouse or Mitre 10 here in New Zealand, and they're awesome. They don't draw a lot of power. They're pretty cool just to get a bit of air out if it's a bit stale. Or use it if driving. If you're using an older bus, definitely recommend these. You can get rechargeable ones which are quite cool. This is just a cheap plug-in one. I also plugged in my drone battery and that's all working, so yeah, I'm quite happy with it. It's a very sturdy unit. It was a bit tricky to get all the cables fed back up into the cupboard. They're a bit stiff, probably because they use that thicker cable and a lot of electrical tape. But yeah, super happy with it. So yeah, thanks for joining me in this video. We are off this weekend on another adventure, so see you soon.